Hi, today we're going to be going over the trunk and what it encompasses, like the parts of it, and we're just going to be doing a basic overview of what lies in this area. And we're not going to go too into detail, we're not going to actually do the organs or anything, we're just going to be sticking to the sort of muscles and what lies in the trunk region. Um, yeah. So the first thing we want to do is get the trunk, and we're gonna actually observe the first physical features of it. And the first layer before you cut into anything is actually the skin. And what you realize with the skin is that it's supplied by a variety of nerves, and these nerves are referred to as there's basically a single nerve that supplies that skin region, and they refer to as dermatomes. So here is like a sort of map of the dermatomes. As you can see with our trunk region right here, you're supplied by pretty much all the thoracic 4 to about 9 and 10, and then when you go a bit lower, just around here, you're supplied by around all these level 1 to level 2 mostly. So yeah, that's the first thing. So dermatomes is basically the area of skin that's supplied by a single nerve. And what we want to do here is we're just going to slice through the skin, and what we should get is a bit of fat, because underneath the skin is actually some fat. So you got a fatty layer, and the first fatty layer is actually called the camper of fascia. So that'd be this yellow layer right here, and that would be the first layer. And then underneath that you've got a membranous layer, so that'll be the scarpa's fascia, and that just basically sticks all the fatty tissue to the muscular tissue underneath, and then underneath that will be the sort of the muscles and the muscle groups, and we're going to go into that. This fascia lata here, you don't really need to worry too much about this, because fascia lata is actually the fatty tissue from the thigh and onwards, and we're really only going to focus on the abdominal region. So let's go to the next section. So this next section kind of gives our first part that we covered. So we've cut into the skin, and where we're making this little, what this little segment belongs to, I should have mentioned, is around here. So we've cut it around here, and then you come to this part here. So you've got the skin and you've got all the muscle groups here, but we've covered this part so far. So that would be the skin and the campus fascia, and obviously the scarpus fascia, which is the membrane that's sticking all the fat to the muscle groups. And the muscle groups are something quite interesting. So the muscle groups, we've done the muscle groups from the thoracic cage video, if you can remember. So that was the pectoralis major and the serratus anterior right here. So we're not going to focus on them, but we are going to focus on these three right here because they're quite important, and of course this one as well. And what you can see is the first muscle group is the external oblique, and the external oblique sort of mirrors the external intercostal muscles in the fact that it runs in the same direction. You can see it's moving downwards, kind of like if you put your your hands in your pocket, for example, you'll see that it runs down and it goes medially downwards. And you've got the internal oblique, which is the next layer. So if you cut just underneath, as you can see, we're moving just down from here, the external oblique, into the internal oblique. The only thing really separating these two is a very, very thin membrane called the investing deep superficial or investing fascia. So there'd be the superficial, intermediate, and deep. So we've got the superficial separating the muscle, that'll be just underneath the campus fascia, and then we've got the deep regions and intermediate regions, which would be separating each of the muscle groups. So we have the internal oblique, which is just underneath the external oblique, and this goes in the complete opposite direction. That actually mirrors the internal intercostal muscles. and then underneath this you have the transversus abdominis, which goes to the side, so it sort of it mirrors in that direction. So we can do a little thing just by here. You can see this goes in that direction, this goes in that direction, and this goes in this direction, this being 1, 2 and 3 in levels of deepness. And then once you've got that, you've got all these muscles, and what happens is the muscle groups lie on the side, and as they come to the middle they become aponeurosis, which is like a thin fibrous white tissue. And aponeurosis is basically the substitute like for tendon. Is like how you'd have the biceps, you'd have the main muscle, then you'd have the tendon which attaches to the joint. So you have it instead with flat muscles like these, you'll have an aponeurosis, which is like white fibrous tissue, and it connects to here, which is a white fibrous line called the linea alba, literally translates to a white line. And here it's not labeled on the diagram, but here is the linea semilunaris as well. And yeah, so that's basically translates into semilunar line because it sort of cuts here, and you see the linea alba, just this white line going in the middle. But then you have this very interesting muscle group, which is basically the six pack, which is the rectus abdominis right here. So that goes down, and we're only focusing on the trunk. There is another muscle down here called the pyramidis muscle, but pyramidalis, we're not going to focus on that. We're only focusing on the trunk. We'll come to that later on, and it'll be quite easy if we separate into chunks, smaller chunks like that. So what we're going to actually do now is we're going to make a little cut, well, a big cut just down here, and let's see what that leads to. That will give us a nice transverse section that looks a bit like this one right here, just above the arcuate line, and this below the arcuate line. Now the arcuate line is quite confusing, but we'll get into that. And as you can see, you've got the external oblique. Obviously, remember the 1, 2, 3 thing that I just talked about. So the external oblique will be the first, then the second layer down is the internal oblique. So this external, internal, and then the next layer down will be the transverse. Now, what's interesting here is how it sort of connects into the middle, how the aponeurosis of the tendons come around the rectus sheath. And this diagram just hasn't really got them, but there's inferior epigastric arteries and superior epigastric arteries. We're actually going to get into them a little bit later. This diagram here just shows how the rectus abdominis starts, and that's basically the line, the cut here, the first cut here, and that basically is the sort of transverse section of that. The next cut is down here, is this layer right around here, and then finally, as you're going right down to the bottom, right around here, you have the last little diagram right here. That's the last transverse section. So what's the arcuate line? And it can be quite confusing. A lot of people do get confused by it. So we're going to get into that, and then we'll talk about we'll finish up on like the peritoneum and what that means and what it shows. So this diagram is a pretty good diagram because it's nice and color coded, but it shows you here above the arcuate line how the six pack, like the rectus abdominis, this basically this long muscle shaped a bit like this, sort of slices through each of the aponeurosis. So first you can see that if I do the external oblique as red, you can see that it kind of comes over like that, and then it continues coming over the whole way through like that, and then you've got your internal oblique also coming over. Let me just do a different color. Right, to just continue where we just left off, my computer just crashed, and yeah, I lost some of the work, but just continuing. So we're just talking about the arcuate line. So you see you've got the arcuate line right here, and it'll come around right around here. We're talking about how the rectus sheath, the rectus abdominis muscle, which is just this one, sort of changes throughout, and where the arcuate line is as you're going down. So as you're going down, you'll have the rectus sheath, and you'll have different sort of muscle groups and the aponeurosis of these coming over. So you've got the muscles on the side, they don't really come over the rectus sheath, but you have the aponeurosis and they come over. So the first, as you're going over, you'll have the external oblique muscle coming over, and it's aponeurosis, which is what I've highlighted red, and then you'll have the internal oblique as well, which will always also come over, and you'll have lastly the let's do this one green, and then you'll have the transverse as well, and the transverse comes underneath, but if you have these two underneath and the other two on top, and well, actually the other one, the internal, comes all on top and below, then by the time we get to the arcuate line, the peritoneum right here sort of ducks under and comes on top. So all the layers now, all the aponeurosis are on top, and the arcuate line is right around here where they've labeled it. So at that point, all the aponeurosis will come on top of the rectus abdominis, and none of it will lie behind, none of it will come behind the rectus sheath. And yeah, so that's that part. Now I was mentioning that I was going to come to the inferior epigastric and the superior epigastric vessels and how they run through the muscles. I lost all them other slides, so we'll just ignore that for now. But with the inferior epigastric, it'll come through and it cuts through right behind. It'll cut through right around here. This not on this diagram, but it comes through right around here. And the superior one will be a different vessel that will go right around here. So the inferior epigastric artery actually comes from the external iliac, which is this artery right here, and then that comes from the descending aorta, and then you also have the superior epigastric vessels, which are coming from the top, and they will come from the left subclavian, and I've just highlighting the left subclavian right here, and that comes from the aorta as well as this nerve, and that comes into this direction, and it follows its way down here and into the abdominis, and it cuts under pretty much all the muscle layers, and it sort of supplies them, as you can see. So we've done all these layers now, and we've talked about them. The last little part to cut through is just this little section here, and that is just basically extraperitoneal fat and parietal peritoneum. So the extraperitoneal fat will line the abdominal cavity, and that will actually cover the organs. It's like a fatty protection layer for the organs. And then you have the parietal peritoneum, which we're going to cover more in another video, but that sort of lines up the organs, and this is basically the boundary of the trunk. And then after this you have all the organs lying here, in like every case for the most of the trunk anyway. The last little part I'm going to mention is just this little clinical case. And what is this? This is actually prune belly syndrome, and all it is just when a child lacks the abdominal muscles, the external and internal oblique, and it can just cause basically it just causes like sort of delayed development, and it's a pretty serious disease that requires surgical intervention, and that's pretty much all you need to know about the trunk. Thank you very much.